Assalamu alaikum. Welcome all to our second of four-part series on the month of the first 10 days of Dhul Hijjah. So tonight we have Dr. Lazzouni, and he will be talking about the significance of Hajj. Please remember there is a program tomorrow night also at the same time with Dr. Salim Khanani, and then on Wednesday we will conclude with Dr. Imam Talal, inshallah. So Dr. Lazzouni, whenever you're ready, please.
جزاكم الله خير. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونتوب إليه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهدي الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. First and foremost, greetings to all of you. Thank you so much for toughing it out and staying with us up until this time. I must confess that I'm a little conflicted. I don't know which of the tones I should take. Some sort of tone that eases you in going into bed, or giving you something that is stimulating and could keep you awake all night long. So hopefully, inshallah, all jokes aside, we'll try to make the most of this this little time together, and hopefully, inshallah ta'ala, we'll learn as much as we can from what I intend to present tonight. So I thought that first and foremost, we constrain really to make the discussion with you not very taxing, to constrain the time. So I promise that it will be only 20 minutes long. So to cover the points I wish to discuss, I thought maybe we should do them at a rate of about 4 minutes per point and cover only 5 of them. And they are intended to be teasers, so we can take them and reflect on them on our own, inshallah, as you go further into them and perhaps explore them by yourself and see if you can align with some of the suggestions I'm going to put in front of you, or find otherwise, both of which will be very insightful rather, to figure out where you can take them, and I'll leave that to your discretion. So the first point I want to talk about with regard to reminiscing about Hajj is not to talk about something that is ritualistic, but to talk about something that I call foundational. All things that have a history, probably the most important point in their history is the starting point or the pivot points that they take along the way. And I find the starting point of Hajj quite extraordinary by itself, and indeed deserving of much reflection and much pause. And as such, what is the starting point? It is this rather almost inadvertent, almost subdued historical fact of this young lady with a newborn child, abandoned into the vastness of the desert, and trying to make a life for herself and her newborn against extraordinary odds that sometimes are really quite daunting to just reflect on them, let alone try to relive them or express them into one's life. So what does this origin mean to me personally, and means in terms of the foundational principle of Hajj? It means a large collection of symbols, all of which are critical to our understanding of our own religion and our own deen. First, this idea of the matriarchal founder. In other words, generally, Islamic history is taught as being a history that is very much androcentric, man-centric. And the man characteristics in it are the ones that have a tendency to be highlighted more than anything else. I find it extraordinarily humbling to reflect on Hajj, because Hajj offers this contrarian idea that, in fact, it is not a androcentric narrative. It's a rather matriarchal narrative. The founder of the origin of Islam happens to be a woman, and the beginnings on how she started this pivot and course of history is rather extraordinary, because the first installment of what she has done to bring about this religion was not to conquer a land by the sword or to reduce a vast empire to ashes or to split the seas or to bring some sort of thunderbolt from the heavens or things like that. It was rather something very simple, to nurse and give water to her child. And then from that, control a water hole, accept some visitors to come to the water hole to change status from being visitors to settlers. And from that form the nucleus of a small gathering that then becomes a community, that then becomes a tribe, that then becomes a nation, and it kind of goes from there. I would invite each and every one of us tonight, inshallah ta'ala, to take this really important point to heart, and from now on, go reflect on this point very, very seriously. As of late, I took particular interest in a number of strategies that are being employed for sort of undermining the Islamic narrative. And a lot of our enemies and people who do not wish us very well are significantly investing in counter narratives that are based on giving the women in our community a voice, of providing the youth with ways of thinking that are outside the normative tenets of Islam and things of that nature. And wouldn't it be interesting to provide a counter narrative that starts Islam as a matriarchal starting point? That's a very heavy point to start with, and it was designed to be as such. So I'm going to leave this idea with you, and inshallah ta'ala invite you to think about it in your own terms, of course, and reflect on it, about what you want to do with it, and the centrality of it, not only to Hajj, but the centrality of it to Islam overall. So that's point number one. Point number two is the idea of a single mother that gives rise to her child, and the child who becomes a tribal chieftain and a founder of nations. I am certain that all of you who are well-read in religious history all know that the usual narrative in Judeo-Christian heritage is to set up Ismail, the son of Hajar, always as an anti-hero, meaning that in the narrative of the Semitic people, and primarily all of the ones that exist within the Judeo-Christian heritage of the Western Church and the Western Synagogue, obviously the heroes have a tendency to be Jacob and Joseph and Isaac and all of the ones that are very, very important. And Ishmael is always sort of the third wheel, the unwanted child, the unworthy heir, the burden into the community, the son of the slave. So you have all of these elements that are conjured up specifically for a form of religious racism and second-class citizenships that is also embedded into this part of this Hajj narrative, embedded in two of the major rituals. First, the ritual of Zamzam itself, were it not for the prayer of the mother to bring enough water to spring forth from the bowels of the earth in order to quench the thirst of this child, this source of holy water that's called Zamzam would never have been there. And so Ismail, in some sense, is the source of life, of holy water. Because of him, we have this gift that continues to come to us and continues to bless us to this very day for everybody who's blessed to go and visit the holy sites. Imam al-Yaqubi, one of the great historians in Islam, who has a chapter on Ismail alayhi salam, it's very interesting on how the voice of Ismail as a prophet, messenger, descendant of Abraham into this branch of the Semitic tribes that went on the side of Ismail, is essentially a reset, a reboot of the two classes that have always organized human society since: the haves, the descendants of Isaac, and the have-nots, the descendants of Ismail. And what a privilege to be part of the have-nots, because it so happens that it is from the have-nots that the most privileged human being of all of the descendants ended up coming into the branch to become Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So you can see that from that source, the gift is not only the gift of life, meaning water, but also the gift of prophecy going to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to allow him to become the prophet that brought us Islam, and who's the proud descendants of Ismail alayhi salam. I think that the second point I want to leave with you to go and reflect upon it here is that being a descendant of the have-nots is not a burden. It's an opportunity and a privilege to set the course of history in a direction that is more favorable than perhaps the haves have it ab initio. That's an equally heavy and very demanding point to go and reflect on. So these are two of our foundational points in terms of where we come from. So let's now, inshallah, very quickly conclude on the last points, because they are not as daunting or as demanding. And they are the following ones. The idea of ritual, why is it that for all other forms of ritual, fasting, which is deeply personal, prayer, which can take place anywhere according to the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where he said that the entire land has been made to him a masjid where he can prostrate himself. But when it comes to pilgrimage, there is a requirement to connect back with a certain geography. In other words, there is a religious, this is not a functional requirement, this is not a historical requirement or social requirement, it is a religious requirement. In other words, it is a foundational argument into the rite itself. With it, the rite is valid, and without it, it's not. And that is the visit to the holy site and the holy places. And in those rituals, two of them are the only two that I want to cover today, which is the ritual of sacrifice on the day of Nahar, and the ritual of throwing the pebbles to this destruction of these three totems that represent in some way the things that we cast the evil to. And I find these two extraordinarily important, meaning they both mean something very, very important symbolically. So let me take, first of all, the casting of the stones in the three aqabas, one after the other, on the day of the Hajj, where we go and we cast 7 stones in the first and the second round, and then into third round. One can almost feel a sense of primordial ritual religion that takes us back to something that is very simple, very primitive, very almost shamanic, or almost prototype religion, where the way you exercise an act of devotion to God, to say, God, I want to be yours and I want to communion with you, and I want to cast away the distractions from my life. The way I deal with those distractions is I stone them away. It's an act of rebellion. And again, here is the difference between the haves and the have-nots. Today in the world, the haves, when they want to cast their enemies away, they release on them, literally, not figuratively speaking, they release on them hell from the heavens, these techno-industrialized forms of warfare with drones and nuclear weapons and smart bombs and depleted uranium and I don't know what, and you exterminate cities and communities and villages and tribes in one swoop of a ball of fire to render them into ashes and they disappear forever. And yet the have-nots, the only thing they have left to them to resist the onslaught of something that wants to take away their freedom, their life, or their spirit, is to cast a stone. What an amazing act of rebellion. What an amazing ritual to be done. And it's not a boulder, it's not a big thing, it's not something that requires somebody to lift it for you. It's a mere pebble that has the strength of God in it, that is cast at the enemy in order to render that enemy powerless. I call that the power of the pebble. And I'd like you to reflect on that when you have time, inshallah, to think about it. The fourth point and the one before the last is the one that I think, and I apologize if this is gonna offend some into this reflection, is this idea of the life giver and the life taker. The nahr, which is obviously as described in the Quran, which is the blood sacrifice that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't receive from it, neither its fleece nor its value, but all that he receives from it is only the act of devotion that was given to him. And so we are invited to spill the blood of this animal for the sake of God, etc. And so that part is the part that you know and you are very familiar with. The sacrifice of it is that I want to bring you back to its origin. Imagine this story, if I were to take this entire story of the interaction between Hajar and Ibrahim and Ismail, and I really reduce it into 3 milestones. Mom gives birth to baby. Mom raises baby to early childhood. As soon as baby is raised to early childhood, dad comes back to kill him. That doesn't sound right. Something doesn't click right. I think that that's incredibly important in so many ways for the particular point that I want to make. In other words, that matriarchal starting point is the momentum that brought back this sacrificial ram for Allah to intervene, to say to the mother of the child, much like he did with the mother of Moses, I am going to return him to you alive. So I'd like you to look at the perspective of the sacrifice, not from the standpoints of the trust and faith of Ibrahim and the willing of sacrifice of Ismail, but I'd like you to think about it in terms of Allah returning Ismail to his mother the same way that he returned Moses to his mother once Moses was taken away from her in order to save his life. In one case, Moses was not ransomed, he ended up living with Pharaoh. In the other case, Ismail was ransomed and the ram took the place and Ismail returned to his mother. That's a perspective that we don't hear a lot. So I'd like you to think about that as being the fourth point. And we'll conclude, inshallah, as I promised. And as I said, we'll conclude in 20 minutes from the time we started. The last point, which I think in Hajj is extraordinarily important, is this idea of the redemptive nature of the pilgrimage. At the end of the day, what's the point? Yes, there is the idea of we go to Hajj because it is the 5th pillar of Islam, and obviously an edifice that is missing a pillar is not stable. It needs the 5 pillars to be complete so it can hold the wealth and the weight of its truth and its authenticity. And that's why we need the 5th pillar. But at the same time, in that pillar, there is a purpose. And the deeper purpose is this redemptive nature, the reason for which in the Kumbh Mela for the Hindus, when they go and dump themselves into the river, the purpose of the ritual washing is purification. In the Wailing Wall for the Jews, when they go and they cry and lean against that particular wall and they insert the prayer in it, the nature of it is that redemptive nature. You're paying back for all of the things that have happened, and you are seeking that particular purification. In the case of the Christians, as they go back to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and they go through their rituals, or this, because of the hagiography of the many saints that they do, whether it is the saints of St. James of Compostela or our Mother of Lourdes, or whatever they do in Catholicism to go to some pilgrimage for sainthood, they go to these places in order for them to seek what? Is to seek this redemption, where the idea is the grace of Allah to enter the Hajj sinful and to exit the Hajj sinless. And that's a very high note on which it is deserving that we stop. So probably this is one of the most unexpected ways of speaking about Hajj, but I thought you were a deserving audience, and inshallah ta'ala with these ideas, they can cause one of two things, maybe sweet dreams as you take them into your bed, or maybe serious reflection where we can talk about them. I'm curious to hear about some comments, some ideas, and then I'll turn it over to Brother Ijaz, and inshallah we can close whenever he closes the meeting.
Thank you, Dr. Lazzouni. And as you just mentioned, so we are now open for any questions, comments. You may unmute yourself. And if for any reason you cannot, just raise your hand and I will. But I think everybody should be able to unmute and ask questions if there are any. But so I will give you a minute. So I don't see any. So I think, Dr. Lazzouni, I don't see anybody raising hands or asking. So maybe they are still reflecting on some very deep, the point that you have brought up for us tonight. And or, as you mentioned, it may be late at night. So one of the two things. so with that, and I want to thank you again, as always, just keeping our, it's called thought and intellect going. Alhamdulillah for that. And for everybody, so tomorrow night, the same time, 8:45, Dr. Salim Kanani will be talking, and his topic for tomorrow night is the day of Arafah, inshallah. And then on the 6th, which is Wednesday, again at the same time, 8:45, we'll conclude with Imam Talalid, and he will be talking about the specific preparing for Eid al-Adha and also the Udhiya, the Qurbani as our sacrifice, as it's called.
Assalamu alaikum, Brother Lazzouni.
Okay.
Alaikum.
All right, so I'll stop and then have Malik Saab say something here.
I just had one question. In the beginning, you said something about this being a female tradition. I didn't follow that part. Could you say a word or two about that?
Sure, happy to. The general historians of religion claim that when it comes to the history of the Arabian Peninsula, the area where currently the sacred site in Hijaz, the sacred site of Mecca, was essentially inhabited and not inhabited. So it was vacant, and there were some very good reasons for that. The primary two reasons, one was climatic, and because it was just unbearably hot and had no way that you can live in it. And the second one was obviously what is vital in the desert, access to a water hole. There were no known pathways of any form of sustenance or water or access to anything that had water. And as I'm sure you know and remember your geography, probably the closest place to the coastline is about an hour to an hour and a half west of the place, to make it all the way up. So it was basically a very difficult place. We have ample evidence today that geologically the land is volcanic, and it's a very active volcanic land. Al-Hajar al-Aswad, the black stone itself, is a remnant of that volcanic nature of the land itself. So an incredibly harsh terrain, a difficult place, an area where you really don't have any access to things else. By and large, the place was actively avoided by anybody. So when you think about it in those terms, the first person, for lack of a better term, that settled it and started a family first, and then a little grouping, and then a community, and then a nation, and then a tribe, and then a nation entirely, was this woman whose name is Hajar. So who do you think is the founder then of that entire community? The answer is Hajar, which makes this entire lineage that goes back to her for all of the descendants of Ishmael, her descendants. So it makes us have at our origin a matriarchal origin, because when she started this nation, she started it by herself with Allah as her support. But Abraham, her husband, had left her and went back to continue his mission, leaving that burden to her alone. And that's what I meant by talking about the founder of this entire area and this entire experience as being a matriarchal process that requires reflection and revision on how we understand and we see our history. Does this help?
It does, but then that raises the question, about Abraham.
Yeah.
Why did he leave his wife in a place which is so isolated? There's nothing in there, and there's nobody else living over there. So, how?
Yeah.
It doesn't. It raises a question about Abraham. He was a cruel person that he did this to his wife, and
yeah, not quite. In our religious tradition, things that happen, if you wish, they are almost like, for lack of, it's a bad analogy, but they are like scripted plays for a purpose. And behind them, there is a design and a purpose. So Abraham's mission was not to abandon his wife and his child, but it was to deliver his wife and his child to the barren desert to start a new nation with them, while he continued to go and work within the Semitic branch that he had direct lineage and direct responsibility to, where the blood relationships were much tighter. So this is in continuation of his mission consistently with the divine orders, rather than a deadbeat dad who abandoned his wife and his child to the winds in order to run for his life and go enjoy himself in some other place. So that's not the context in which he has left them in that. As I'm sure it's very well known to everybody on this call, there is in fact official record on exactly the exchange that took place between Hajar and Abraham when she realized the odds that she was up against, and she said, sort of, where did this idea come from to abandon me into a barren place to my own devices and to my own self, which sounds like you are abandoning me to a certain death. Then when he remained silent, which means that he did not have the voice to answer the question that she was asking, he was going to allow God, the scriptor of the play, to answer for himself. And then she realized, okay, then if this is a command that came from the divine, that I will be in good hands and life will continue. So in other words, here, it's not the free will of Abraham to be a deadbeat dad and a wife abandoner. It is the divine design to put one for one purpose and the other for the other. Good question, though. I appreciate it.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Thank you so much for the question.
That makes sense. It's an interesting and very deep point.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Malik Saab. So as I was saying, to conclude, So just a reminder that Eid al-Adha is on July 9th, Saturday, and there are two prayers at 7:30 and 9:30, and the location is the same, which we 7:30 and 10:30. 7:30 will be Imam Talalid, and 10:30 will be Dr. Lazzouni. That thankfully has accepted our invitation again this year. So inshallah, and the location is the Best Western Trade Center, which is in Northborough, 181 Boston Post Road West. That's the part you have to. But if you have any questions, the information will be on the website. We'll inshallah send another email with some more details on the logistics of the place and all that, inshallah. So with that, once again, thank you, Dr. Lazzouni, for your time tonight. And inshallah, see you on Eid Day, if not sooner.
Can you particularly issue a part of your presentation in the khutbah? Refer to this in somehow the matriarchal origins of the society that arose in the.
Are you requesting that I elaborate on it a little bit more in some khutbahs in the future?
No, I'm saying that on the Eid khutbah, if you could just refer to it in somehow.
Oh, sure. It'll be my pleasure, of course. Yeah.
That because this is quite an interesting way of looking at it, and I had never thought of it that way, but many people would appreciate it.
Sure, absolutely. We will make it available, inshallah, to a broader audience, inshallah. Thank you so much for the suggestion. We'll make sure we'll oblige.
Okay.
Thank you.
And also, I think it's late at night, so maybe I also misspoke. Somebody has corrected me. So the hotel is in Marlborough, and I think I said Northborough. So let's put it again. So in 181 Boston Post Road in Marlborough, and inshallah, we'll see you all there, and also tomorrow night and also Wednesday night. Thank you. And assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Assalamu alaikum.
Very much, brother.
Assalamu alaikum.